So now's the time of year. Christmas jumpers are on. Tinsel is being worn. There's that chance not only to enjoy Christmas, but just to take stock of the last 12 months, but also to think about the things that you need to do to be able to do employer branding as a sector justice, but also in your role and your team just as possible. So that's why I'm delighted to have Chris Murdoch, who is host of another podcast called Employer Brand. How you doing, Chris?
I'm really good, thank you, mate. Yeah, really, really nice to see you. Long overdue. I think we've had one or two things in the diary that we haven't been able to, for one reason or another. So we had to get it done before Christmas. It was just dragging on for too long, and I'm glad that we've been able to create a little bit of festivity as well.
I've got pizza. I've got a cat.
That is
Santa cat riding a unicorn, and the unicorn is breathing fire. So all in space, of course. That's what Christmas is all about.
That is. Was that like a generative AI jump? Was it like I want a cat riding a unicorn?
Yeah, the brief was very specific.
I want it to be festive.
You know what? I wouldn't be surprised actually if that's how it was created.
Yeah, love it.
Like we were talking we've been talking about this before, but in our green room chat, is that one of the great things about having our own podcast is we get to talk to so many people. I think between us, we've spoken to nearly 50 people this year.
Yeah.
So, and that's just purely from the podcasts that we do. So I think it's great because it's great to be able to have those conversations with people, to really learn from them, and also for us to share our thoughts as well with individuals that we talk to. So it just made sense for us to kind of combine efforts and go, right, what is it that people can need to think about, when it comes to the next 12 months, because a lot's happened this year and no doubt a lot will happen over the next 12 months. So yeah, anyone who's listening, chance us to maybe put your feet up, get your headphones on, get a drink in, whatever drink that might be, and just, think about, what we can say to help you basically do better next year and continue the upward trajectory. Ultimately, we're about, again, I think what we talked about before, Chris, is why do we do this? And it's about elevating the sector, isn't it? Employer branding is like a massive piece.
Absolutely. And I think like we were talking about a little bit earlier, Chris, it's like, having these conversations, with these people and doing the podcast in the way that we do, it's almost quite humbling in a way, like to realise how much you don't know. Well, certainly for me, I'm not talking for you.
No, you're right, absolutely.
But, I'd like to say my surface knowledge is pretty good. There's a real breadth, but when
100%.
you start really going in laser focus, there's just so much out there. So yeah, hopefully a little bit of that stuff we can share today, and it will help people moving into to next year as well.
Definitely. And let's think about, what have you seen as being like the big kind of trend in the challenges that people have faced over the last 12 months?
Yeah, well, there's a few things. I think the first topic, that I'll kind of dive into is AI, particularly Gen AI. And I think this year has been the year of employer branders just trying to get their head around how they can leverage Gen AI to help them generate content, strategy, execute plans. But I think the struggle this year has kind of been trying to get your head around Gen AI, but trying to somehow weave in authenticity, which those two worlds kind of collide a little bit at the moment. And I think we'll continue to see that moving into next year. It's like there's so much value to be had from AI and Gen AI in the world of employer branding. Executed in the wrong way, you can take backward steps with your strategy, and you can start implementing these things, which is like, okay, Gen AI will generate our job descriptions on demand. Gen AI will, generate or splice up our content on demand. And that stuff is great. And I think once it's fine tuned over time, you'll start seeing enormous value. But I think implemented quickly and in slightly the wrong way, it could have quite detrimental effects and could set some strategies back, several years. Because, Gen AI and, as I say, authenticity, there's a real clashing of heads. And I just think Gen AI will definitely, obviously, always have a place in employer branding, but it's just trying to navigate how it can be brought in, and you can still deliver a really authentic experience for the people that are consuming your content. It's you're implementing a strategy that is scalable, for many years ahead, as opposed to sending you backwards, 2 or 3 years.
I think you're absolutely right. It's like there's a danger of, because it becomes easy, to bash out a job description, because if you don't put the effort in, then actually it's just regurgitating content that's already out there. Now you can argue that there are some things from a clinical perspective, ticking boxes perspective, where it's good to have it created by AI, but actually it's more about what you put into it. And the rise of be more talk about, and this has been naturally driven by OpenAI and ChatGPT, is agents and GPTs. So you can basically teach these digital agents about a subject with your own content, and then they learn about it, and then they can give answers off the back of it. So I think actually, for me, the AI piece is really interesting from a research perspective. I mean, God, over the years, how much desk research have you had to do? And got to be like days worth of stuff, where actually now, with well positioned questions and providing the right kind of information, actually you can start to do things like understand more about audiences. What are the biggest challenges facing CEOs, for example, or insert whichever job role, or facing whichever stage of life people are at. That's where I think AI is really valuable. But I think still people are seeing it as being writing job descriptions and writing content.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. If you do that too much, it's just you lose the authenticity, and you can tell.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think it becomes that, adopting that kind of approach, people will tell and you will get found out. But I absolutely agree with your point of, as long as you invest the time, as long as whatever your strategy is, you're pouring time into it to make sure that the AI agent, the GPT, whatever you're using, really understands who you are, what your brand is, what it stands for, what are your values, what do you live by, what's important to you, what's not so important to you, what's really unique about you, what makes you really different from everybody else. But just pouring as much time, effort and energy into that process as possible, because I think that's when it will obviously start to regurgitate the right messaging for you. I think what we're starting to see at the moment is it's still a relatively new concept. I know it's been around a while, but employer branders using this, out in the wild, I think this year we've seen a huge spike in that happening. And there is a knee-jerk reaction to be like, right, crap, okay, I need to get this piece of content out. I need to create that document. And it is like, and it's distributed, it's sent out there. And I think that's the wrong approach.
Mm.
It's a very tempting approach because it like slashes, his workload for that project, massively. But I think, moving into next year, it's just, I think, in time, making sure whatever platform, tech stack you're using, because I'm sure you will be leveraging AI in various capacities moving into next year, but just pouring lots and lots of time into that process to make sure the outcomes are what they should be, and they're delivering the best possible experience.
Absolutely. I think conversations I've seen, actually conversations I've been part of, I was in Belgrade at an employer branding festival, talking to a video production company founder, and Ben Kessler, on my podcast, and he was talking about how they found it really useful to lean on AI to help with research, things like persona building, and get that kind of research would take ages to get if you're just doing it manually. But it's, as you're so right, I think when you're saying what you're saying, it's like, well, it's crap in and crap out, isn't it? Ultimately, if you don't put some time into actually teaching your AI technology what it needs to know, then you're going to get rubbish out. I've heard some people say, "Oh, I've tried it and it's not very good." Well, the chances are they've probably not spent too much time, putting effort into doing it. But I think in particular, it's got to be careful. It can't be the last. If you do want to create content with AI, you've got to have it as a starting point.
Yeah.
that's it from a research perspective, but also from a content creation perspective. If you're like writing copy, it's got to be a starting point. There's absolutely got to be a starting point, and ideally, it's got to be based on stuff you've already fed it. And you can do things now like input, add web addresses,
Absolutely.
and AI can look at that. You can upload PDFs, and it can look at that. So there's that thing about using AI from a post-production perspective.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
creating clips. That's a massive time saver.
Yeah, and on that note, actually, Chris, I've seen some tools from I think various vendors, have this kind of capability now. But it's Veed, Veed.io,
Yes, yeah.
and they've got some amazing tools at the moment. So where you're able to, chuck in, an entire conversation akin to this kind of conversation here, but it will pick up the nuances of the conversation. It will pick up the pauses and the breaks, and it will slice and kind of splice up that conversation into multiple clips. And I think that use of AI is amazing because, as you and I both know, content feeds the strategy. I don't think there's any argument about that. And I think, there's always been kind of a little bit of a difficulty or hindrance in like content creation where creating content is hard enough. Creating multiple pieces of content is really difficult. And then having a solid distribution strategy thereafter, it adds another layer of complication. And I think the more tools in AI that can help us with that process, so really authentic content going in, like this stuff actually happened, we actually had this conversation, no one gave us these ideas, but then leveraging AI to kind of amplify that entire process thereafter, making the things that sometimes feel really difficult to scale almost, quite scalable quite quickly. So I think, yeah, on the topic of like moving into next year, I think, yeah, tools like those, I think will be massively on the rise.
Definitely. And I think, even things like transcriptions have improved so much. I remember the days of having to do it manually, which
Yeah.
actually wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
And it's amazing the accuracy now that there is even with YouTube and their caption generators. It's usually pretty good, which can save a lot of time. And I think this I think for me moves on to the next thing really, which is like for me when I was like, so to prove your generative AI, our AI conversation, your point is that I had a busy morning, so I wanted to kind of brush up again and go, okay, what kind of trends are there out there? And I was like, I'm just going to ask Google's Gemini
Yeah.
and just talk to it. And so when I was getting ready after my run, Gemini just talked to me and just told me about, what the trends are. And I could have so easily have been like 20 minutes late for our meetup because I was going onto Google and researching it. Now, of course, you've got to make sure you actually say, please provide sources here. So actually you're getting the facts checked. But,
Yeah.
Gemini basically, while I was getting ready, was saying generative AI was one of the top things it mentioned. But also resilience and adaptability, and also the rise of Gen Z coming into the workforce. So I think there's that thing about you've got to have a more adaptable approach to employer branding.
Yeah.
The set play pieces of, right, we need to look at our employer brand this year, because we didn't last time we looked at it was 3 years ago. Wouldn't be the first people to say that you need to maybe doing it more than every 3 years because times change. But there's this thing about really employer branding being always on. So, but we've got a backdrop of often needing to do more with less.
Yeah.
So how on earth are you going to be able to have a near always on approach to your employer branding when actually you're just struggling to do what you're doing at the moment? But that's where you lean on technology, definitely, to support that.
Yeah.
I
And I
think
think
also, no, go on, mate.
I was just going to say on that particular point, I agree. And I think the on off, like the start stop nature of employer branding, which we always see, it's really, really common, is in the large, in my experience, because it's always so closely associated with hiring needs, which obviously fluctuate. I think the problem being that there's often this massive oversight that what employer brand does internally. And I think that's a huge oversight. Like companies that kind of use it almost exclusively as an attraction tool are missing a huge trick. And I think that always on approach, the benefit that it provides, across internally across retention and and happiness and reducing recruitment costs internally and all this kind of stuff, and so many other benefits obviously internally, but the benefits are huge. And I think that's another key kind of thing moving into next year, is making sure that companies can start detaching employer brand and talent attraction. Obviously, employer brand, and talent attraction go hand in hand, but is absolutely not the one kind of exclusive reason that you should be working on your employer brand.
I think actually the rise of, I've seen over the last 12 months, a lot more conversation about employee advocacy.
Yeah.
And also the rise, a lot more conversation about personal branding.
Yeah.
And actually, the two come together. Yeah. You could argue that actually, I believe that employer branding is personal branding at scale.
Yeah.
Just having the right collection of people together who, ideally you want in an organization. So, and that employee advocacy piece, I think, is great, because actually hoping there's more emphasis on employee advocacy programs, leveraging your people to then be your media channel, so to speak, is really important. But I mean, I've said this before, but not using them just for their reach.
Yeah.
Yes, it's great. Oh, great. Employees have, X number of percentage more reach on LinkedIn, for example, compared to company profiles. So therefore, let's just give them stuff that they can share. That's not the way of doing it. And that's why I like the rise of employee advocacy conversations and the rise of personal branding, is because actually the personal branding thing is like, what's in it for me as an employee? So that's important. Not, we need to do us a favor and help promote the companies. No, actually, if we can help promote the company by giving you a platform, then fantastic. Yeah. And then by identifying those biggest advocates of the organization, it's really important. And I've seen a lot more. I mean, the technology has been around for a long time, but just seeing again more conversations around it, which is employee generated video. And I have to look at like It, for example. Other platforms also are available. But It is a good example of a platform that started a number of years ago. I think it's, dare I say it, maybe 10 years ago, or nearly there.
They've been around a long time.
But that's that thing about you leveraging technology so that employees can create content is, I think, something that is only going to continue as a trend, especially in this whole thing about needing to relook at budgets in terms of like.
I totally agree. And I think even, going another layer over that, I think moving into next year, something I'd love to see more of. I don't know if it's realistic or not to expect it, but, even moving away from like the rec tech, stacks and the employee generated content stacks. An ideal scenario for me, if I was a job seeker looking at joining an organization, if I was able to get a peek into, 3, 4, 5 people that I'll be working alongside in a particular team, but actually what's going on in their world doesn't need to be work related. They'd obviously need to be part of an advocacy program group of some description to be comfortable to share content. But it might be that out of that group of 100 people in the technology team in London, 5 or 6 of those people are like, look, do you know what? I'm really happy for anybody publicly to look at my Instagram stories. I typically post once or twice a day or 3 times a week or whatever. I'd love because that's where those people actually post. That's where their real life is, whether it's Instagram stories or TikTok or whatever. But start to give job seekers an insight to the real world of the people that they'd be working with, day to day. And again, it's not rocket science, obviously, but I don't think it's something, there's a lot of bureaucracy in place at the moment in companies where the thought of a group of people sharing, personal and relatively private information with the public and stuff, there's kind of grey area around that stuff. But I'm such a huge advocate of super cliche, we hear it all the time, but that authentic storytelling, and it's really difficult to capture authentic storytelling when it's almost like thrust upon people, as in, right, we've got some new technology tools, and at 11 o'clock on Monday, we'd really like you to tell an authentic story about something going on in the world.
Doesn't feel authentic, does it?
Straight away, it's like, okay, yeah, let me think about what I'm going to do. But I think what we need to do moving into next year and way beyond is like, how can we rip off the bedsheet somehow and, grab hold of those stories and that world and give those people visibility to it? Because that's what's really important. They're potentially going to be working with those people. How can their world and their world come as kind of closely intertwined as possible? I don't really know the answer, because I think there's a lot of grey area amongst all of that. But I just know that there's still a lot of hurdles for us to come over moving into next year to like capture those powerful stories that desperately need to be told.
I think actually, but what you say actually is a nice connection to another trend, I think, which is, and I mean, Gemini didn't come up with this because, again, I didn't prompt it in a certain way. I just said, what are the key trends facing business? But I think this is connected to it, which is, you look at LinkedIn. LinkedIn is finally becoming the platform it was always meant to have been. Not just a place where you have your resume and you find jobs, although of course that is a massive part of it. And you have to look at, the shares of percentage pies of how much money is made through talent solutions at LinkedIn to show that is a big thing. But with now video finally becoming, as a bigger format as it needs to be on the platform.
Yeah.
That's like, I think, a big deal, which is, they've even now added just recently public video views on videos. So actually you can see not only, you can see how many people have actually seen it, how many impressions there have been.
Yeah.
But to actually see the video views shows that actually LinkedIn are taking videos really, really seriously. But actually that as well, I think, is kind of just proof that there's been a lot more interesting content being shared on LinkedIn. And actually, in a way, senior leaders of organizations, because they'll be on LinkedIn, actually starting to learn a lot more than if they just maybe decide to take a marketing course. Because there's basically mini marketing courses all over LinkedIn without them to do an official course. So that knowledge, I think, is a lot more accessible, which I think then means that thought leadership is becoming personal branding, and LinkedIn is becoming the place to do that. And LinkedIn is saying video is important. So for me, that just goes to show is actually, organizations need to be going, what is it? What is it when it comes to actually giving the freedom for our employees to actually share their opinion, share their advice, and share their expertise?
Yeah.
Or benefiting them, but also benefiting the organization. Because there are benefits from a B2B perspective there. There's benefits from a B2C perspective, but also there's benefits from a talent attraction and retention perspective if you give people the freedom to do that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, going back to that previous point of like just, tearing up the red tape, taking away bureaucracy, and giving employees like freedom, and making it really clear to them that, look, you've got your own voice, you've got your own opinions, you are free to share them. You are free, and again, it's bold, and maybe there's a lot of grey area about, in particular sectors, where that wouldn't work, and, how that, is absolutely something you would be able to do. But I agree with you completely. I think it's if companies were able to start letting their employees and their people know that, look, we respect who you are, we respect your opinion, we respect, your story, and you are completely free to tell that story. I think the whole industry would move on a couple of gears, because I think at the moment, even in episodes, and you must have this on your podcast as well, Chris, I speak to people probably every other episode. It's like, oh, by the way, I can't mention who my employer is. And just that one thing.
It's crazy.
So they're not even allowed to mention the company they work for because it hasn't been signed off by marketing. That's just the name of the company. That's not like their personal, like, I work for this company and I've got an opinion on this. That would blow the marketing department's brain. And I think that's a huge problem that we face this year and in previous years, that I'd really like to see those barriers dropping, moving into next year, because, it's, again, cliche, but authentic storytelling and like marketing bureaucracy, they just don't go hand in hand. And it's
true.
giving people the peace of mind to know that they are free to go and tell their story, I think would move everything on, a few steps.
So that's the expectation as generations that have grown up with with life online. Of course, we know there are challenges with that as well, of children growing up with a digital life, but there is that, going back to the trend about Gen Z entering the workforce and having different expectations. There is that thing about actually true authenticity, because they have access to that. The brands they follow, particularly the celebrities, footballers, to Kardashians, to Billie Eilish, I mean, all sorts. There's expectation that you can understand what's going on behind the curtain. So I think I think hugely important. I think that thing about personal brand is that thing about what's in it for the individual. Actually, yeah, we want you to benefit from this as well, not just saying, can you do something because you're going to help promote us as an organization?
Yeah.
Like, well, yeah, but I'm really busy.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
haven't got time, and you want me to say certain things.
Yeah.
It's really important to have that co-production approach, I think, as well. It's massively important. Otherwise, it's not authentic, and it doesn't tap into the employee advocacy piece that is only going to rise in terms of a topic and a strategy to help attract and retain staff.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I don't, I think taking it back to kind of, from a talent attraction point of view, employer branding is obviously, it goes way, way beyond that. But just from a talent attraction point of view, I'd much rather, from a personal branding point of view and, content in general, I'd much rather know that that guy, girl, whoever that I'm going to be working alongside, potentially for 8 hours a day for the next 5 years, they're also into Kasabian. They go to a load of, similar, festivals and stuff that I'm into as well. They, are massive enthusiasts of X, Y, Z, love whatever, as opposed to, I love, developing the latest, JavaScript, development language or whatever. Again, that stuff is still really important, but it's being able to, pull off the bed sheets really of, what are these people actually like, because that is that that's going to fuel the other piece.
Absolutely, ideally you want to have those experiences that you would have in the first 3 months of organisation
Yeah,
before application.
absolutely.
It's good for everybody involved, isn't it?
Yeah,
And let's not go down the route of give and get, because there's a very popular book written about give and get, isn't there, about attracting the few and repelling the many. But I think there's that thing about, I like to see it simply as being, it's a rapport that you get from seeing people and what they do and how they think and what they're like outside of work. That's the kind of thing that makes people want to join tribes, the
yeah,
communities that just happen to be organisations and
yeah,
get to do great work as well. I think there's definitely, you dig down those kind of headlines you can easily get from that kind of stuff, and dig down, that gives you the authentic content that you're talking about, definitely.
100%.
But that speed thing as well is important, because like we think about, of course you've got the employer, Bland podcast, but you've got a certain company called Voice, which is software that's basically enabling people to get online presence fairly quickly. So that speed thing is important as well, isn't it?
I think so. I think so because we know content drives all of this stuff. It drives the experience. It drives the emotional connection that you can create with people. Enables you to find people in channels that maybe you've struggled to strike a chord previously and whatever. But I think historically, content in general with employer branding has been difficult to scale. It's like, great, we've created one. We were talking in the green room before, Chris. You've got that one 60 grand, career
And the rest. Yeah.
showpiece, and it's amazing. We've been working on it for 3-4 months or whatever. But it's like, what is it going to do for you thereafter? How is it going to move the needle and generate real ROI? And I think scalability in content, that's the big issue for me with employer branding. It's trying to make all of your content as scalable as possible, and just making sure you can kind of just squeeze the lemon and get as much juice out of it as possible in every single piece of content you create. And I think that's still an ongoing problem. We're not going to fix that like now. We're not going to fix that next year, but that's an ongoing thing. So yeah, with voice, that is one of the challenges that we try and help solve for companies. And it's with those pieces of content, having a piece of technology in our digital job description product, so visual job ads on demand. You can create templates for different regions, teams, that type of thing. But yeah, if you have that story from that particular person, just make sure that that's going into a place, whether it's a digital job description, that can be shared to a bunch of different places and, generated automatically from your ATS or whatever it is. But I just think my general feeling is that whenever you're creating content, just like you mentioned, just think about scalability and just think about squeezing that lemon. It's like, we're going to post this video in this place or put it on that one careers site or whatever. What's happening after that? Because that is the tip of the iceberg in regards to what it should be doing for you. So yeah, whether it's voice or anything else, obviously we're not on here to sell anything, but yeah, just be mindful moving into next year that if you are in the zone, which you should be, of creating content, just have scalability and squeezing the lemon in the back of your mind.
Definitely, I think you're right. I think we have a situation where YouTube continues to be the second largest search engine on the planet, although TikTok is definitely doing its best to tackle that. And there may be a way of them suggesting they are actually the second largest search engine on the planet after Google. Certainly senior people at Google for a long time now have acknowledged the fact that TikTok is, a threat to their search, their search business. But with the rise of video, and even like with LinkedIn, talking about LinkedIn, where there is now a video feed, there is now video views being shown on videos that are being produced. Is this video has always been important for a very long time, but it's like this is the year where it's actually, again, the signs are very, very obvious that you need to be producing video content. But there's then the challenge of going, if I'm producing video, then I need to commission a video shoot, and I need to make sure that I'm getting the most value from that. Now, I'd say traditional ways of doing it, which is more focused on promoting the organization, and how it's a great place to work, limits how much you can squeeze that lemon.
Yeah,
really. So, because I've said it lots of times before, but anyway, it's like you can only serialize a job ad. You can only so much. You can only serialize we're a great place to work so much. So if you're actually thinking about the pain points or the passion points of individuals you would like to join your organization, then content becomes a lot more easier to serialize, because you just have such rich conversations from longer form content, story content, or thought leadership, or expertise opinion content, or advice content, then it's easier to then scale that content and for it to last a lot longer.
Yeah, totally agree. I think it's a really interesting point as well, around LinkedIn, the rise of video on LinkedIn. And obviously it's not a new thing, but again, in the last 12 months, we've seen a huge spike. Video's obviously been on LinkedIn a lot, for a lot longer than the last 12 months, but there has been a particular spike in the last 12 months of LinkedIn influencers, of video content generally, and just like we now expect it. If there's a post and it doesn't include a video, it's like, whereas 3, 4, 5 years ago, if there's a post with a video, it's like, oh, this one sticks out like a sore thumb, there's a video.
Yeah,
I think there's definitely a certain irony as well, like you were mentioning, like Instagram and TikTok. I think the irony is that I don't think many of us are that bothered about who sees our social content. Like, don't get me wrong, you've just had, you and your partner or your wife, or whatever, just had a newborn baby, and there's personal content. That's kind of probably for family only or whatever. But generally speaking, I don't think we really mind typically who sees it. If something come up on my Instagram and it's like, for whatever reason, which would never happen, by the way, because I've got a following, but 5,000 people have seen that particular video, I'll be like, oh, I think it's quite, oh, that's really interesting. Like, not really bothered. But the content that we seem as humans, like, that's the realist type of content, whether it's on an Instagram or a TikTok, for whatever reason, I think there's a thing in our subconscious that lets ourselves be ourselves on that platform. On LinkedIn, it's probably the people that we kind of want to be, or we're aspirationally like working towards a lot of the time. Shouldn't be that, but I sense that's what largely there is a bit of a veneer that comes over, so many of us, on LinkedIn, for example. But I think the irony is it's on that other side. We're trying to attract talent using this platform, whereas it's on these other platforms where there's like this enormous opportunity, which doesn't seem to be heavily leveraged.
Especially YouTube. Like YouTube
Absolutely, and
is
YouTube
such an
to be
underutilized
right up
platform.
there. Absolutely, yeah, exactly. But yeah, but LinkedIn, obviously, like the value that it brings is enormous. But I just find it brings a certain irony of it is the talent attraction platform, but doesn't actually showcase real people a lot of the time.
Well, no, this is the thing about what personal branding is
Yeah,
and what it shouldn't be. And it's personal branding is. They say personal branding is what people say about you when you're not in the room. Let's say that. It's an easy thing to say, which is there's some truth in it. Personal branding isn't you just shouting about how great you are. Oh, I've just won this. Although I've won a few awards, and I'm happy to share it. But it's like if that was all I was doing, I wouldn't be posting much.
yeah, yeah.
But also, it's along with other stuff as well, which is people kind of getting to kind of follow my journey a bit and kind of bit of building and public side of things, but also sharing my opinion, which is what this podcast is about, and bringing other people's opinion into it as well. But yeah, I think that's where the great thing is, going back to the personal branding piece, is actually how can personal branding be done in the right way?
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I think there's a bit of a stigma as well, Chris. Like, there's been a thing knocking around LinkedIn, particularly for a number of years, and it's like, this isn't Facebook, that comment.
That's it. Yeah.
And I think that's actually done a lot of harm to the LinkedIn movement because, people kind of being scared, of actually bringing their like real self to LinkedIn. I think that thought, I think, is in the back of a lot of people's minds of like, that's not really LinkedIn content. I shouldn't really, and I think there's a huge opportunity missed there as well, where people should just not worry about that at all. We want to know what these people do in their free time, what bands they're into, what's really annoyed them this week or this month or whatever it might
Mm.
be. Because I think, that's the stuff we all gravitate towards. That's a true employer brand for me is, what is your unique point of difference? How do you kind of stick out from the many, many around you? And I think, in that, like, and setting fire to that, this isn't Facebook sign is what really needs to happen moving into next year, to get most value from LinkedIn anyway.
I think going back to the generational thing as well, just people expect LinkedIn. It's an online platform where
Yeah,
people can share content. So
yeah,
therefore, it's going to be a place where you share all sorts of things
yeah,
because it's just part of who you are online. There's no part of who you are. I think there's a generous expectation that, but yeah, Facebook's been around since I was born. Yeah, it's fine. So TikTok's been around for ages. Instagram's been around for ages. YouTube has been around for ages. I'm talking to one of my clients. He's in his mid-20s, and he's like, "Yeah, YouTube. I grew up with it."
yeah.
And
It's a
so
man.
it's that expectation. Of course, LinkedIn's going to be a platform like that. Of course, there's someone like me who's been in social media for bloody ages and going, when is LinkedIn finally going to really kind of bite the bullet when it comes to video? When it's going to really, be more than just a job platform? And it finally is. So I think, in a way, if what LinkedIn are doing are showing senior leaders the way things should be done, then
Absolutely.
fantastic.
Yeah,
But YouTube is definitely a very underutilized platform. So
yeah,
I think kind of start to wrap up a bit. Wrap up. To use a bit of a Christmas thing there. Sorry, mate. Couldn't help myself. I think there is this thing about what we talk about here is actually there's a demand, quite a lot of content, isn't there? So we talked about techniques on leveraging employee advocacy and employer branding and using like video capture software to be able to do that. I think there's also this thing about to succeed over the next 12 months. I think it's really about looking at kind of your internal content production function,
yeah,
and going, look, let's look at our employer brand and how are we going to get to creating, you know, content at scale without necessarily having to break the bank. So I think actually looking at, not to say that all of a sudden there needs to be business cases for different headcounts, but I think about going, what does a content production function look like in this business? Is it actually just the employer brand manager or someone in talent acquisition that's responsible for going out and talking to people?
Yeah.
Yes, but they could well be someone who's more of a lead producer, take on a kind of media company type mindset, is going out there and having that kind of journalistic mindset on and going, right, I need people to help me create content. So identifying some champions within the organization that can then go out and help, create content. But also to have a good kind of production workflow as well, where actually you're looking at your content needs, but then find the opportunities to serialize content you're producing.
Yeah.
But then also giving people the tools to be able to create their own content. But I think that thing around, this is a whole other episode. Maybe we pick it up next year, but about having that internal content production function, which has very kind of clear defined roles, and those defined roles don't necessarily have to be just within your team and just be down to you, but can be going, right, who's going to be leading the kind of the strategic direction of content that we're producing? Also, who's going to help produce it? Because that could actually look like, someone spending 10% of their time, maybe 3 of those people, going out and getting content with you.
Yeah.
To be that kind of virtual team. And I think for all the talk about video, it doesn't mean it has to always be a high-end production piece.
100%.
Every further time we might have got this in the studio, but it doesn't have to be in a studio to still have capture some good content. So actually, I think leaning on those virtual tools that can help you record content rather than just leaving it to employees to do stuff because they're busy, and you can give them all the guidance. And sometimes certain people just I don't know where to start.
Without a doubt, I agree completely, Chris. And I think initially it would seem like a real culture shift. There's a lot of change management that would go in place to adopt a production strategy internally. But I think with a little bit of help, you can get those things set up pretty quickly. It's a pretty painless process. I think the beauty of it is once it's set up, done in the right way, it starts to run itself, especially if you can lean on advocacy groups. So you've got a bunch of advocacy groups there, they throw their hat in the ring to make sure that once a month or whatever, they'll make sure they round up the troops or they kind of, fire up the teams and, make sure something happens, make sure some content is being created. But yeah, I agree with you completely. You'll probably still want some professional projects
100%.
created here and there, that will, typically I'd imagine still happen. But yeah, getting a production arm of some description up and running internally, then getting all of these different groups around to kind of almost self-manage that process, I think, that's how you kind of win moving into next year and beyond.
Exactly. Well, look, how many times you go online and see people holding these things?
Yeah.
These mics and talking. So actually, you can, even with your phone, it's good quality. The latest iPhone is really, really good. So actually, using these and just finding opportunities to do that, as well as maybe finding an online studio like Zoom or any other platforms are available, of course. Where actually we use Riverside for this. This is really good. But do that to then put that content out, to then sense check what content resonates.
Yeah.
Because there's a relatively low risk, so to speak, but there's a strategy behind it, good thinking behind it, then there's a low risk there. If you're getting, say, internal comms involved and saying, if we create this content, it's actually going to be good for you as well, then you might even get some support to do that.
Absolutely.
But then once you'll see what it's like in the real world, using your content creation actually as a research phase and going, right, well, actually, I should have found something recently where leadership was a particular topic that resonated. So if we do a higher end production later on down the line, then we know that leadership is something we might have to, investigate. So when you do then invest in the higher production pieces where you do need a bigger crew, you do need to have, locations for a shoot, then you've kind of got the reassurance that some of the content is resonating.
Yeah,
but also trying the people that you're already spoken to, so you're not just giving them a brief in an email and they rock up on a day and going, I've got to sit in a studio in a chair and answer some questions. I'm not sure what I'm doing here. They're absolutely bought into it.
Yeah.
And you are treating it a bit like a media team, production team that's just
100%.
bringing people in to help them tell their stories and share their advice.
Absolutely. And let's face it, like from a storytelling point of view, there's so much to extract. And I think the best way to do that is like take talent attraction out of the process. We're not necessarily talking about a job. We're not necessarily like trying to sell to people. Let's just try and extract the stories. So this month, theme of content creation is based on corporate social responsibility, not necessarily what the company does, but what are you passionate about? And maybe they're charities that you support, maybe they're initiatives that you've been involved in now, previously, whatever. But just get everybody in that advocacy group to create a snippet of content. Also share that internally. Everyone internally is like, I didn't realise you did that, John. My mum used to be involved with those guys and da-da-da. You create this whole beautiful thing with the internal employer brand. It's absolutely still content you'd use externally. You're involved in loads of different teams, super low cost because you've got the production arm up and running. The following month, it might be on music and something else. And it's like, I'm into this band. First time I went to see them was 15, 20 years ago, whatever. But, you get the point. But I think ironically, let's take away talent attraction and like selling to people. And let's try moving into next year anyway, start doubling down on, let's just extract stories and
exactly.
We'll do what we need to do with those stories.
Pull open the curtain a little bit, isn't it? I think, when we talk about creating a production function, I think it can feel like it's a lot. You look at kind of your production stack, so to speak, that itself, can be very simple in terms of like looking at recording software that you can use, but also looking at equipment that actually is relatively cheap. It's like £100 for this Saramonic, a couple of mics with a receiver, and it's great. In fact, I'll probably do something. I'm going to do something around kind of technology and what tech people can use to set up some sort of function. But one reason for saying it is that Tatjana Obenhaus, who was sorry if I pronounced that wrong, Tatjana, but when she was head of global employer brand at Miro, she didn't have a massive team. She would rely on freelancers to come in and support at certain times, which then meant she had a strategy set out, but then a plan of when she wanted content to be produced, and then would just bring people in. So it's not about investing in headcounts, it's about going, when do I need these people? And then doubled with the thing about using AI to do your research, to understand maybe what the pain points are and what topics are, or identified trends that are worth talking about. Then you've got a really great way of just, I suppose, doing employer branding more justice over the next 12 months, because it's such a rising specialism, and I think it's had the most profile in organisations as ever has done. And long may that continue.
Yeah, agree, Chris. And I think it's like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit around us that sometimes we're a bit blindsided and miss. Like there's just so much opportunity to create. There's so much low-hanging fruit. There's a lot of opportunity around us. And I think so often with employer branding and content creation, it always feels like, it can sometimes feel like there's so much effort that needs to go into the process, where actually if you take a minute to look for the wood for the trees, you can actually start seeing that actually there's just so much opportunity around us to create so much at low cost and that's scalable. And there's a bunch of people that want to help you with it that you might not even be aware of at the moment. Just go and have those conversations, even if it starts with your first advocacy group. You don't need, when people talk about advocacy groups, I think for some people, employer branders, it can feel like this enormous project of like, God, how am I going to go and create like 5 advocacy groups, to support recruitment? Don't, just go and create one really small advocacy group, and you haven't got a clue what you're doing. That's fine. Just go and do it, and you'll figure it out together. You'll sit down,
exactly,
have some workshops and some amazing things, and frame it in that way as well. It's like, I'm bringing you guys together because I want your help, and some amazing things will come out at the other end of it. But yeah, I think moving into next year, like, don't think like you need to have all the answers. Go and try stuff, A/B test stuff, fail at a bunch of stuff, don't do that stuff again, double down on the stuff that's working, A/B test that again until it gets better. And there's a whole load of low-hanging fruit around us sometimes that I think we can
My
miss.
goodness, yeah.
Keep your eyes
And
peeled.
I think, in terms of like, final thing for me, I think would be like making sure that I think next 12 months I think COVID now is a distant memory for most, as in, it happened a good few years ago now. That I think there's that being back in person is now not a surprise. It's like, okay, but it's just slightly different now. It's because we spent so much time, and this is even before COVID, but spending so much time with people online. When you do meet up with people in person, there's a lot more familiarity there. So I think finding opportunity to get together with other people to share your experiences of rolling out employer branding within an organization and maintaining it, I think is really important. So things like the EB Space and Claire and Alex, and they did their first meetup a few weeks ago, and that was great. And so finding those opportunities to meet up with other people, I think is all going to definitely help over the next 12 months.
Absolutely.
And if you guys want to listen to a podcast like this, I'm more than happy for you guys to subscribe for sure. And also Chris, your podcast is great. Employer Bland. I mean, you've got to listen to a podcast called Employer Bland. It just goes without saying, but I love what you're doing on the Employer Bland podcast. It's great. So definitely anyone who's watching, definitely have a listen to that.
Thanks, mate. And the feeling is very mutual as well.
Cheers, buddy.
But yeah, I agree, and particularly on the meetup thing. You and I both went to the EB Space, and I think those types of events, that particular event was amazing, and other very similar ones are great too. But great opportunity to catch up with other peers in the industry. It's been a tough 12 months for us all. I think there's quite a lot of trauma bonding that goes on at those events at the moment.
Exactly.
We're all tackling our own things, but yeah, just catching up, getting that kind of FaceTime is that needs to be a big thing, I think, moving into next year, doesn't it? Yeah, I agree.
People bounce back into the office, and or back at their work office, home office, and ultimately move this amazing sector of business forward. It's a great place to be. Great chat. Thanks very much. Loving the tinsel. Great to have a conversation with you as always, mate. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, really good catch up, and loving the jumper. And you and the girls have a very, very Merry Christmas, mate.
And yours as well. Yeah, it's going to be a busy one, isn't it? That's for sure.
Both of our households, I think. Yeah, but have a good one. Really good to see you.
Cheers, mate. Thanks a lot.
Cheers, Chris.